Welcome everybody to the Brisbane Laravel Meetup. It is great to see a lot of new faces and a lot of old faces. I would like to start by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay our respects to elders both past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So I would like to start by introducing you to Will. He's the CEO of Trilogy Care, who is kindly donating our venue today. So he's going to tell us a little bit about Trilogy. Thank you, Will.
Thank you. Is there a mouse I can look into? Okay, I need to just grab my computer first. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, stream. Will will be right back.
Just going to put this here, guys. Thank you. Right, well, that's loading. Just thanks. Welcome, everyone. So this is obviously the Trilogy Care office, as we mentioned. So Trilogy Care, we're an aged care service provider. So for a lot of you guys, you'd sort of look at Trilogy and be like, why is an aged care provider here at a Laravel convention? And hopefully these slides will help you guys see why. First of all, we'll just go with house rules. So apologies, I've got so many devs in the room here, we should be able to get this on board. Okay. So bathrooms are located just in here to the right. So men are on this side and then ladies are on the far side. The doors have been left open, so you should have access to that. In an event of emergency, the fire exits are near the bathrooms as well. If you need to go downstairs during the event, the external doors and lifts will be locked at 6 p.m. Anthony's phone number is just here. Anthony is my head of technology. Can you just give us a wave? Up the back there. He's running away from me. That's all right. Yeah, or just text someone else that you know here as well. When you exit the building, the green button at the bottom, some people get stuck downstairs. You should see a big green button, but it'll let you out. And help yourself to drinks and pizza, which is just in the fridge over here, and pizzas are over here. So before I let you guys jump into the Laravel topics, I just want to tell you a little bit about Trilogy Care. So as I mentioned, Trilogy Care is a home care package provider that helps older Australians to access home care services. We do this thing, we pilot this thing called self-management, and that allows a recipient of home care to manage the services themselves and find workers all across Australia, whether it's someone in the neighbourhood or on some online platform like Mabel. Most other traditional providers employ all their labour, so one of the things that Trilogy does is we have no connection with the labour force, which means that you can get good rates in terms of negotiating those rates. So our key value propositions are better value and choice. And we're available in all states across Australia, offering two service offerings, which is a do-it-yourself model of fully self-management, or a coordinator model where you have some intermediary who helps you to find those services. So a home care package, it's basically funding to stay at home for as long as possible. There's 4 different levels ranging from $10,000 to $60,000. Interestingly, an aged care bed in a nursing home costs every one of you guys $110,000 as a taxpayer every year. So by offering additional funds for services in the home, we're actually doing a great job in sort of saving tax dollars. Typically, the services that you offer is anything from like personal care, helping with showering, domestic assistance, home modifications, but also things like equipment purchases as well. Unlike our competitors, you might see these guys like Ozcare and BlueCare. Trilogy Care is a value offering. We offer a self-managed at 15% and our plus offering at 26%, while you will find that the traditional providers typically offer a much higher admin fee, meaning that there's more hours of care for our recipients. It was founded 3.5 years ago by the three of us here. We don't have an affiliation with any church groups, but we like to call this the father, who's the managing director, the son, myself, as the chief executive officer, and Glenn Wright, who is our seed capital founder. We call him the Holy Spirit because he never shows up to work. But he's done pretty well investing early with Trilogy. So in 3.5 years, if you want to hear more about the story, there's a nice YouTube video. It has my father, who initially came into this business to find a cost-effective model for my grandparents. You guys aren't going to remember that YouTube URL, but maybe just come talk to me afterwards, and I'm happy to share that story with you. In 3 years, we've grown to 8,000 customers. We still onboard about 450 a month, so it's a really fast-growing organisation, and we've shot to number 2 in Australia in the home care space in 3.5 years. This is just an example of our customer base in the Brisbane region. These are all our active customers at the moment, and these are all the service providers that have ever offered a service to us. So you can see why we're looking for a tech solution outside of the default sort of CRM we're using at the moment to try bring all those guys together. As you sort of grow this into the southeast Queensland region, I guess this is Brisbane behind this big cloud over here. You've got Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast at the bottom there as well. Customers in Sydney and Melbourne as well. So we're a national provider, and we're really making an impact in aged care in Australia. We're a bit understated in Northern Territory, only 90 customers, but that's part of our sales strategy. So we're always hiring. This is just our sort of growth trajectory of total employees. We've gone from June 2023 to basically a year, added another 60 employees. And in the last year, we've really taken on this new custom Laravel project to take ourselves off of the Zoho CRM dependent organisation we've been. So if you're ever interested in sort of talking to me about hiring, Anthony, who is my head of technology, Anthony, he's back. Yep, that's his phone number. That's his email. You probably want to email him first. We're definitely growing that team. At the moment, we've got everyone who's a Trilogy member. You just want to put your hands up, and this table over here, it's probably about a team of 8 to 10 people at the moment, and growing. So quickly on the technology, before we sort of jump to one of the talks, you can see this is our tech stack over here on the right, and it's quite convoluted, and we've just decided to go to a Laravel because a lot of these workflows and things that we do in CRM can be limited. Just as an example here, I think some of the dev boys today were looking at the build process. Our workaround for the first couple years of operations was just putting these public Zoho forms on our website to capture information. So the thing that Zoho didn't offer for us was a user portal. And by going Laravel, we can start involving all of our stakeholders in the workflows. So in that bill example, providers can log in and submit their compliance documents, but then also do a lot of the data entry for us and submit bills. Clients can then, and their families can log in and track the bills and budgets and even approve those bills. And then finally, our internal team and our coordination partners can see all that information and case note and incident management and do those sorts of things as well. So our goals for this platform and for the reason we went down the Laravel route is just to create operational efficiency. We have 25,000 bills that come in every month. Is that the right number, Anthony? Who's also ducked out as well. I think we can fact check that, but I think it's approaching 30,000. So by doing those sorts of things, making good investment dollars, we hope that $1 spent in development in the salaries that we pay can create $3 of cost savings in the people and the operational systems we do. Creating a user-friendly customer experience, which helps us build competitive advantage and unique selling points compared to those traditional providers as well. And that's the whole point of our Trilogy Care portal. We're working on some other projects as well, which is just diversifying ourselves away from the sort of Trilogy Care offering. But I'll leave that one for another day. If you're interested to talk to me about that, just come approach in the interim. Thanks, guys, and hopefully you enjoyed the day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Will. It's awesome to hear switching to Laravel. I love to hear that. Our pizza has arrived slightly earlier than we expected. So rather than let them go cold, what we figured we'd do is have everyone come and grab some pizza, maybe 5 minutes or so, and take them back to the tables. And then we'll get Stephen to kick off his talk in 5 minutes or so. Tables, please. Grab enough supplies of pizza before you go. I think there was also, drinks in the fridge there if anyone wanted to grab a quick drink before we get started. I'll give you 15 seconds. 14. 13. What comes after 13? 12. 11. 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. It's hard to count when you're up in front of people. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1. All right. We have with us Stephen Rees-Carter, who is going to give us a presentation. I can spoil the title, right?
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Browsers are magical creatures. It's right there. Thank you very much, Stephen. Give Stephen a warm welcome.
Cool, thank you. Where do I stand? Just anywhere around here or somewhere specific? Yeah. Awesome.
The mic is there.
Mic, cool. All right. I'll do my best. Okay. All right, so browsers are magical creatures. So what are web browsers? What do they do? I mean, back many years ago when they first were a thing, they were just another app on our computer. You know, we used Outlook for our emails. We used, Solitaire when we were procrastinating from work. We used Word to write our documents. Did anyone use, was it Encarta for like learning stuff? Yeah. And all the floppy disks and all that nonsense. And then we had this little thing, Internet Explorer or Netscape or whatever it was called back then. And you'd run it occasionally when you need to look at something online, but everything else was through the app. Now, basically everything is a web browser. If you think about it, we do Gmail or Fastmail or whatever our mail client is, most of them are websites through Chrome or Safari or whatever browser you use now. We use Slack, which, yes, is a desktop application, but guess what? It's just a browser. It's a very memory-hungry browser, but it's just a browser. VS Code is a browser. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it, but that's just a web browser. Half the apps that we use now, probably more than half actually, are all web browsers, like Notion's app. Anyway, there's a big long list of all the different apps that are all just web browsers. And so web browsers now are everywhere. They do everything. Like our phone, half the apps on your phone, again, web browsers. There's JavaScript everywhere. There's HTML everywhere. And so because of this, web browsers can't just be this simple little app that you use occasionally to do some little things. They have to do everything. They have to be strong. They have to be powerful. They have to support all these different stuff. And they need to have lots of security. Now, when you think about magical creatures and what web browsers could be, Unicode could come to mind. Magical creature does lots of really cool stuff. I don't have any girls, so I don't know too much about unicorns, but as far as I'm aware, they're, bright and sparkly and do lots of really cool things. However, I think there's a better creature that properly demonstrates what a web browser is, and also I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, so here we go. Balrog. I reckon a Balrog is a much better creature to describe what a web browser is. Also, Greg, they do have wings. So we're talking about a powerful creature, a creature that is really hard to defeat, that is really strong. And you want one of these defending your house when you're using the internet, as opposed to a unicorn, although maybe I'm wrong, maybe unicorns are even better. Like I said, I don't have girls, I can't really answer that question. Anyway, so web browsers, they do lots of really cool things. So one of the things that web browsers is, they give you heaps of stuff for free. And so you can just enable these things, usually through headers on your website, and tell the browser how to work and what security features to add. And a great place to start for that is a site that I don't have queued up, but I should have, is this one, securityheaders.com. Open it up. Can everyone see that? It's all good? Cool. All right, so securityheaders.com is a fantastic website that was set up by Scott Helm originally. He recently sold it to proby.com, but I think he still helps them with it. And the point of security headers is you put your website in, and then it'll tell you what security headers you're running. And it uses your industry best practices, the current default headers that exist that you should be using, and it checks if they're there, how they're configured, and tells you if you could do any better. For example, laracon.au, plug for Laracon by the way, we can see we only have 2 headers enabled. There's a bunch of headers that aren't enabled. Who's used SSL Labs certificate checker thing? It's quite a popular thing. I've seen a couple of nods. It's the same sort of thing. It's going to give a rating. So security headers is rating laracon.au at a D, which isn't that great. I love this line. Your site could be at risk. And then they promote their stuff through this Start Now button, but close enough. So that's laracon.au. What about just laravel.com? Same thing. Sorry, Jess. As a side note, when you're looking at sites on this page and you see those 2 enabled and none of the rest of them, and you know it's a Laravel site, you can probably guess it's Forge, because Forge's default configuration gives you those 2, but nothing else. But yeah, so that's securityheaders.com. And as I said, it gives you, this is showing those 6 main headers there. If I scroll down a bit, see here, it gives a bit of information and some links, useful information. Gives you the headers that it saw, so you can kind of debug what's going on. Also gives you like upcoming headers, new things you have to be aware of, more information as well. So let's have a look at this. And what I want to go through is actually enabling all of these headers on a new site, just to show you how easy it is to turn them on. Because most of these are actually really, really easy to enable. It's a really simple thing that you can do, but it significantly increases the security of your app. So, if I can type at an angle. All right, here's a site I prepared earlier that should get a gigantic F. There we go, and I love this one. Ouch, you should work on your security posture immediately. Oops. All right, first one off the list, strict transport security. That's not where I meant to start. Make that. Is that readable? Cool. All right. Now, for all of these headers and a lot of these browser settings and just all this security stuff in general, the MDN web docs, fantastic resource. They tell you so much information. So if you're trying to figure out how to configure them, what the options are, head there first. It's a good place to start. So strict transport security, the HSTS. So this header solves the problem of downgrade attacks. And what I mean by that is when you access a website that is accessible via HTTPS, your browser doesn't know it needs HTTPS. So if you just type in the domain without the HTTPS to start with, it's just going to go through HTTP. And the browser will attempt that connection first. When that fails, if it redirects or if it fails, it might try HTTPS, might try secure. But if you can intersect that connection, you can, if you sit in the middle of the connection, so you've got the user here and you've got the server, if the user has typed in the domain name, say laravel.com without the HTTPS, then the browser is going to try HTTP laravel.com. If you're sitting in the middle, you can intercept the request, and then when it goes off to the server, you can send the HTTPS version over to the server, get the message back, decrypt it, send the unencrypted version modified to the victim. And so the strict transport security header tells the browser you must use HTTPS for this connection. So if you're making the connection to laravel.com and the browser knows that the header is set, then the request will not work over HTTP only. So you can't intercept the request and then downgrade it to HTTP and then send and intercept it and modify it. You have to change it. So the way it works, and because this works on the request that's being sent out, the browser has to remember it. The browser has to store this value. So if we look at the syntax down here, the first one is the only one that's required, which is max age, which is the number of seconds that the browser will remember that setting for. So whenever it hits the domain or a subdomain and it sees this heading, the browser will remember it for that many seconds. So the default, the recommended is about a year, but if you're adding this as for a new site, then maybe start with like a week or a day or something, depending on what you need. And then the browser's going to remember that, so next time it goes back to that site, it's going to require HTTPS, so you can't sit in the middle and intercept it. The problem you've got, though, is the trust on first use problem, the tofu problem, which means that the first time you hit the server, before the browser knows there's this header, it doesn't know it needs HTTPS, and if you're intercepting that, you can just strip the header. So it's completely gone, and that's where the preload comes in. And include subdomains is tied in there as well, which I accidentally skipped. So include subdomains says, for this domain, and there's an angle which is throwing my mouse up. Include subdomains means that any subdomain of the domain also inherits it as well. So if you access like one of the subdomains of this site, or like the root domain, and the HSTS header is there, any of the other domains are going to inherit that as well from the browser. So that's include subdomains. And then preload, we'll get to now. So preload is tied in with the preload list. What was it? It's gcz.net. Enter there, enter a domain. There we go, awesome. Okay, so this is telling us there's no header. So what the preload list is a list of domains that are known to require HTTPS. And in order to do that, you need to add the header on your site with the preload directive in there. And it gives us the required one down there. So I'm going to go into Forge. Let's just show in action rather than just talk. All right, so here's the header. That's how you add it into your site. That's all you need to do. As I said here, we've got the max age here, so that's a year in seconds. Include subdomains, so all subdomains at sgcz.net will also inherit this. And preload means it can go on the preload list. Now if I go save, wait for that to do its thing. Hopefully Forge doesn't break now because that would be bad for my talk. There we go. All right, and if I refresh this one, should see, oh, that was cached, is it? If I go over here and do this again. What's going on? That did save, didn't it? That is there. Live demos, fantastic. Always do them in talks, you know. There's no downside to live demos. There we go. We're no longer an F and now we're a D. It's working. This wasn't a complete mistake. All right. There we go. All right. So all I did was add the header in that had preload in it, and now the page is green. And now we can actually submit this domain to the preload list. So what the preload list means is that it's a preloaded list and it's stored on GitHub, I believe, at least that was the last time I looked. And Chrome and Safari and Firefox and all the major browsers, when you download them, include the preload list, which means that anytime your browser goes to access a domain on the preload list, it will always require HTTPS. It will never let you access it via HTTP. So there's no way to downgrade it. Even if you've never been there before, the browser is still going to require it. And if you know the .dev extension and the .app extension, they're on the preload list directly, which is why when you register one of those, there's actually a little warning that says you must use HTTPS to use this domain. And that's because of the preload list and security that Google added when they set those ones up. So by enabling this header and adding to the preload list, no one can get to your website without HTTPS, which gives you the full end-to-end encrypted connection, and some people can't, person in the middle attack it, so they can't intercept connections and modify things and then downgrade it on you. All right, so that's the first header. Next one in the list is content security policy, but we'll say that to last because that's going to be painful. No, not painful, it's just complicated. So we'll spend more time at the end. Also, any questions, please interrupt me at any time and shout them out, and I'll be happy to explain anything, or if I'm talking too quickly or missing something important. All right, X-frame options is the next one. So, X-frame options down here. It's worth pointing out this is one of the default ones in Forge, as we saw before, so I had to disable it for this demo. What that one does, and we'll go back to our trusty MDM docs, the X-frame options controls what can happen with the site in terms of being embedded in a frame. And so you've got the two options. You've got a deny or same origin. Deny means that this site cannot be loaded in a frame, which would block clickjacking attacks, which I'll show you a demo of that in a second in case you're not sure how they work. And so clickjacking attacks I'll show you, explain it. But yeah, so you use the frame to either block it being found in a frame entirely with deny, or you can use same origin. And same origin says only this site can load this page in a frame, which is really useful if you do some internal framing stuff. It's worth noting that content security policies override this, and they have their own directive to do more complicated things, such as defining what applications can actually load your site in a frame, so we'll get to that shortly. But this one's a fairly easy one. Unless you need frames from your app, then set it to deny or same origin, and that's why Laravel defaults to it, because most apps don't need to deal with frames. So clickjacking attack, if my session hasn't died, there we go. That's what I needed. So this is Potswigger's labs. They have a bunch of free hacking labs to learn different hacking techniques that are really, really good. Highly recommend check them out if you want to learn some more stuff. Unfortunately, they time it really quickly. Like in the time it takes for me to set up my talk and then give the talk, the thing is timed out, so I have to reset up a session. So give it a sec, because what it's doing is spinning up a virtual machine or something in order for the demo to work. And everything's going to take longer on the demo, because it always does. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, cool. So what we've got here is a basic little web app thing that we can log into. There we go. We're logged in. Chrome hates the password because the password is Peter. And now go to exploit server. Okay, so this is the application that's vulnerable to a clickjacking attack. It doesn't have any CSRF protection on it at all, and you can frame it in anything you want. Now here's a little exploit server they have set up. It's a different domain. If you probably can't see it because it's pretty tiny, but this one's blah.exploit-server.net. This one is blah.web-securityacademy.net. So completely different domains. Now on this one, I'll just grab my, the little attack. No way I'm trying to live code that one. I need the hash. So what I've got here is, make it a bit bigger. All right. So what I've got here is a frame that loads the My Account page of the vulnerable site. Then we've got some CSS to style it, and then a little div that says please click me. I'm going to go store Wait for that to save. Awesome. All right, and then go view exploit. Cool. All right, so here we have the page. This is on exploitserver.net, which is the malicious site. But in the frame, we have the vulnerable site, the application, which is on the different domain. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, and I'm kind of standing in front of it. But down here, the blue button says delete account. That's the button on the vulnerable site. Over it has please click me, which is the text we have on the exploit site, which is sitting on top of the frame. If I move my mouse over, you'll see that it's responding to the buttons and the fields. And the please click me looks like it's part of the site that we're on, so the malicious site, and the transparency is there so you can see what's going on. But the point is, in a click-jacking account, all you would see would be like the application and your button to click. You wouldn't see the delete account button, but that's what's there. And if I click on the please click me, which I think is on a malicious site, it's actually going to click on the vulnerable site and delete the account. So this is the vulnerable site, refresh. Now I'm logged back out. Try to log in, invalid username and password. So I've just deleted the account through a click-jacking account. Click-jacking attack, sorry. And so having the X frame header on there would have prevented that from happening, as well as CSRF protection, but we're not talking about that one at the moment. So yes, that's click-jacking attack. That's why you want to have that header on there, or use content security policy in order to block framing, because frames are really powerful in that regard, if you don't have the protections for them. All right. Oh, did I enable it on here? Probably not. All right, so that one's there. Next up, we have X content type options. Now this is a really simple one, and another one that gets default enabled. Jump back over to its page. This basically just tells the browser to don't try and sniff the type of the file, but trust the type of the file it's reporting, because you can upload malicious files to sites that say are binaries or viruses or something that the site thinks is, say, a style sheet. And then when it sends it to the browser and it says, here's a style sheet, render it, the browser looks in and says, that's not a style sheet, it's a downloadable file, downloads the file, then it could infect the computer. And so the one setting for this is no sniff. There's not really any reason not to have it, so enable it. Enabling it is a piece of cake. We just add the header like that, no sniff, go save. And then when we go into security headers and refresh it, it's going to come out of screen. There's not much else to say about that, really, just the fact that it's really easy to enable, doesn't really affect anything. Unless you're doing something really strange with content types, then I can't see a downside in enabling it. There we go, up to C. 3 left. All right, next one, referrer policy. This is a fun one. There's a bunch of different options, and this depends what your app does. So this page, as I said, it's a fantastic resource, has all the different options in here. Like we've got the start one, we've got like no referrer, so it just does not recruit any referrer information. This is useful for intranets and things. Like you'll often see if you're in your web analytics, you'll have like intranet.company.com or other entertainingly named subdomains for secure pages that really shouldn't be advertised their existence because they're leaking their referrers. So if you've got something like that, set no referrer, there will be no referrer information sent. The default value is currently strict origin when cross-origin, which means that the referrer is only sent. It sends the full referrer internally for the app. It'll only send the domain name for different domains, and it won't send anything for downgrades to HTTP only. So it's a good default. It's a sane default, but I would recommend setting it anyway, just in case, even if this is what you want, just so if a browser changes what its default is, or a legacy browser that doesn't support it, or something else like that, then you want to have a sane default hard set. But you really want to look into this one if your application shouldn't be leaking referrer information, or say your URLs have sensitive information in them and you don't want them going out anywhere. So that's that one, nice and easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next up, permissions policy. I'll just save that in the background. Permissions policy is a relatively new one that a lot of people don't know about. So what it does, and this is pretty good, is it allows you to list the different features that the browser is allowed to let their website use. So these are the standardized features at the moment. We've got accelerometer, light sense, autoplay, camera, battery, etc., geolocation and such. And so you can use this header to disable any of these features that you don't use, which is really helpful if your site has a vulnerability on it, like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, and someone can inject some code that can maybe do some screen recording or some geolocation or turn on the camera or something like that. And so by having this header on your site, you can prevent vulnerabilities from stealing more information or being used to attack your staff and get into your networks. But it's a relatively new thing. I haven't seen it used much in the wild, and it also does have some side effects. Like if you're using browser extensions that do screen recording, it'll get blocked by this as well. So if you do like client work or help support things where using browser extensions that do recording what you're doing on the page or sharing that sort of thing, then some of these are likely to break that. So you need to be careful enabling it. But if you just want to enable everything, you can just do that. So I'm going to go here, select all. There's the policy, copy. Oops. If I find the left click. And then go down in here. Again, like all the other headers, enabling it is really easy. Oh, I've already got it all in here. Easy. Oops. There we go. Enabling it is a piece of cake. It's just another header. Dump them in like that. And then we go save. And then it's going to appear on the list. And so that's 5 out of the 6 headers that we've enabled. All super easy. All of these ones you can do through your web server configuration, like the Nginx config I do in Forge. I see a bunch of clients that'll do it like through middleware on the app, but there's no point if it's not changing. You're deciding this thing once and setting it up for your app or across all your apps. There's no point adding in some custom middleware and adding in that extra layer of complexity and processing time when the web server can really efficiently just add a header onto those responses. So I'd recommend just doing that. Now, there was one more. That's right. We have, you might have seen this one around, XSS protection. This is an old header. Where's it gone? Here we go. An old header that wasn't fully standard and wasn't ever supported in Firefox that was supposed to block cross-site scripting. The problem is it didn't work very well because it's really difficult to detect it. And in some cases, like one of the options is, because mode block just removes what it thinks is cross-site scripting, but this one, filtering, actually could enable cross-site scripting. Like you could manipulate the input so that it tries to filter out the cross-site scripting, and instead it just opens up cross-site scripting and you can attack the account, hack the site. So you don't ever want to use one, it's dangerous. Mode block is not going, it's just going to break the page if it thinks it finds cross-site scripting. Like it'll just stop the page from loading. But the support is being ripped out of browsers, so there's no reason to use it anymore. So that's one to stay away from, even though I see it still gets recommended occasionally from various random security, top 10 things you can do to secure your site lists or something, but just ignore it, you don't need it. So that's that one. All right, content security policies. Okay, so now the fun bit. Right, so content security policy. We're going to look at this site here, which is my Laravel security course. So this is my content security policy for my security course. That big block of text there. Is that any better? There we go. Hopefully that's readable enough. So the purpose of this content security policy is to block everything and anything that I don't want on this site. And that's what content security policy is designed to do, is you define the resources that are allowed to run on your site. And so we're talking about scripts, we're talking about styles, fonts, different connections, frames. And we can see the bolded sections are the types of resources that can be allowed in here. And so what I've tried to do with this policy is lock it down as tight as possible, because this course of mine has hacking examples in it, and so there are vulnerable parts of it. But I don't want someone hacking my course to break into my course application, because that'd be really embarrassing. So this is an extra layer of protection, but this is good in general to have. So this is a really strict content security policy, and I'll show you a less strict one in a second. So to start with, and the most important part in my opinion, is this top line here. My mouse is not selecting. Anyway, the top line here where it says report URI and then the URL. So the thing about content security policies is it blocks violations to the policy, but then you can tell it to report the violations. And if it reports the violation, then you can collect them and you can read them. So there's no point just blindly blocking things and not knowing what you're blocking, because it could be breaking your application. Clients are reporting weird bugs and why isn't this working? You won't have a clue. By reporting the violations with the report URI, then you can read them and you can see what's going on. And so you can fix bugs or fix issues where the policy is blocking things it shouldn't be, but you can also see attacks in progress. And you can see if someone is trying to cross-site script your account, cross-site script your application, and if they're getting a successful payload that the security policy is blocking, you know there's a vulnerability somewhere. Yes, it's being blocked, but it's still there. Then you can go and find the vulnerability and fix it quickly, rather than wait till you're basically breached and you've got a problem. So that's the report URI. And then if we look down a bit, we've got default source is saying none. So by default, don't allow anything. Connect, source, self, and fathom. You see a common trend here. Fonts, no fonts are allowed. Frames can come from these various domains. So frame source is like frames that it loads on the app. Frame ancestors is frames that can load this app, which is none. So that's the equivalent of the X frame header we had before. The only other interesting thing here, you might have noticed if you know content security policies, is this wonderful line in here, which basically allows JavaScript to run eval, which I really don't like having in there, but I upgraded to Livewire 3. And Livewire 3 pulls in Alpine and not the CSP safe version of Alpine, which needs eval. Which is an unfortunate thing of modern JavaScript frameworks, is a lot of them do use eval, and their founders and maintainers aren't concerned as much about the security aspects of the tools they're using, and they're just trying to make it something work really well. And yes, they do think about security in a lot of ways, but eval still gets used a lot, which is kind of frustrating as a security person, but it's what happens. And there is a version of Alpine that doesn't need that, which I need to get into Livewire at some point. Anyway, minor rant aside. So that's a very strict content security policy. This one over here is a very not strict content security policy. This is what's called a report-only policy. So rather than blocking everything, which can be a problem if you're setting it up on a site that's already established, you don't really want to block everything and have everything break. The report-only policy breaks nothing, but it still sends all the reports. And so you can have the reports sent. In this case, I've got them going to the wizard here, and then it's going to send the reports into the collection, and I can see what's breaking, and then I can build my policy around that. And the wizard here, this is what I use, report URI. And so these are the different reports it's collected, and it's telling me these are the different things that are happening on my site, and so then I can allow or block them and build my content policy from that. So that's reporturi.com, so check that out for doing content security policies. Cool, so that's the CSP, and if we enable that, save, we should get, that's, zooms are failing on me. It should go green. Anyway, it'll go green eventually. I think I'm running out of time, so keep moving. What's next? Cool, all right. So, yes, content security policy is fantastic, but they're also kind of scary, kind of like a dragon. Anyone know that movie, by the way? Yes. Yay! Awesome movie. It's an awesome movie. I love it. All right. If you don't know what that movie is, you're missing out. Seriously, I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to figure it out for yourselves. All right. So resource integrity, just quickly, because I think I've run out of time almost. So resource integrity is not a header, but you use it for allowing external resources when you're loading them on the page. And the way they work is, as we can see, this is what Bootstrap gives you when you go to install Bootstrap on your site. The integrity tag here has this hash. And then if the contents of the file here that you're loading doesn't match the hash, it won't load it. Which means that if someone can hack cdn.jsdelivered.net and modify the page, they can add malicious scripts or whatever things in there. If they can hack that, it's going to change the hash of that script, and then your site won't load it, and then you won't get compromised. Now, the British government got hit with this, where they were loading an accessibility helper from a third party. And so someone hacked the third party, the accessibility helper, added malicious JavaScript. I think it was like a credit card keylogger or something into the JavaScript delivered by this accessibility helper, which was being loaded on a bunch of different British government websites. They weren't using sub-resource integrity, so all the British government websites had this keylogger running on them because they were loading their third-party script. So why attack the British government when you're going to attack some third-party company over here with bad security? So by setting the integrity hash on here, if anyone changes the source, then it's going to be blocked, it's not going to work anymore, and it keeps your site safe from attack. And the way to set that up is the SRI hash generator. If it doesn't already come with it, like Alpine annoyingly doesn't give you it by default. It just gives you this. Thanks, Caleb. All right. So we can go directly to the URL, and we'll see here that unpackage actually gives us the full versioned URL. We can just dump that into the generator hash. There we have it. We now have a very safe script tag we can include, including the hash on our site. And if anything changes on that version, it will just block it from loading. Is that a question?
Yeah, I've used this before, and I've found some people update quite a lot.
Yep.
Have you found a way of monitoring so you can monitor when people change things instead of
Could you just slightly repeat the question for the
Yeah, sure. So the question is, some people update their sources a lot, and how do you monitor that to keep your site updated? I don't know. The best thing I can recommend is go to GitHub and then turn on announcements for releases. Because generally, often if they're going through GitHub, they'll do new releases for each of their updates. And then GitHub will give you send the announcement, then you have to send it through. That's the best I can think. There's no other way I can think to do it, unless like Unpackage or something would have a way of doing release updates, announcements. Yeah, if you load it locally, then yeah, you don't have that problem. If you like using Node npm to load it in. Was that? Yeah, well, that's the other thing. As Greg said, because this is pinned to a specific version, unless there's a bug in this version, your site's not going to break. Everything is going to be fine. Unless, of course, that gets compromised or something malicious. As long as they're updating their versioning properly, nothing will change. And so you could be using a really old version of Alpine on your site, but as long as the version of Alpine you're using doesn't have any bugs or vulnerabilities that affect you, do you really need the latest version? And given it's a JavaScript thing like that, there's limited scope for what it can do. It's not like it's a server-side plugin which has a bit more scope. But it depends on your app as well. But yeah, that is one of the downsides of pinning it. But I think the security of using integrity outweighs the downsides of having to update it. So that's SRI. I was going to talk about, do I have any more time or do I need to kind of wrap up?
I'm sure you got.
I'll just quickly do same-side cookies then I'm done.
Yeah, go, okay.
All right, same-side cookies. So, anyone heard of same-side cookies? Yes, I'm nodding. Awesome. So same-side cookies are a way of controlling when cookies are sent in requests. Because the problem you've got is if you've got malicious site over here sending faked requests over to the legitimate site over here, say in the background via fetch or something, or just via forms, the browser, the server over here doesn't know it's a forged request. So the user goes and visits the malicious site, thinks they're doing something over here. In the background, the malicious site is sending forged requests over to the target site, which the victim has an account on, and they can do whatever they want. The victim doesn't know. So this is why you have CSRF protections, CSRF tokens, cross-site request forgery tokens, and same-site cookies are designed to help solve that problem as well. Because although in Laravel we get CSRF tokens by default and they're enabled and they're really good, a lot of frameworks, a lot of websites just don't have them because they don't know how to implement them. So it's one of the cool things about Laravel really is we do get that automatically. So the browser's implemented same-site cookies to try and solve this problem. And so the three options you've got are none, lax, and strict. None works the same way as without any same-site cookie, which means that the cookies are always attached. Actually, I've got these diagrams, this will work better. All right, so when you've got same-site none set, and this is HTTPS only, so it needs a secure flag set on the cookie as well, it doesn't block anything. So all requests going to the victim site will include cookies. Doesn't matter if they're embedded in frames or images, or if they're unsafe requests, they put post, delete, etc., or get and head. They all include the cookies. So you don't want this by default because it can enable cross-site request forgery attacks. Why is it green? Because the requests are going through.
Okay.
There we go.
Green, bad, red, good.
Yeah. Go me. I've never noticed that before. Thank you. To fix it. All right. Same site strict at the other end of the spectrum doesn't allow cookies to be sent at all. So it blocks all the cookies. So that's why because they're blocking all the cookies. See? Yes, I had a. Yeah. Anyway, strict blocks all cookies any cross-site request, which is requests that go from a site over here to a site over here when they're a different domain name, which means that frames can't embed things and have cookies attached. You can't do post requests from forms. You can't even get requests. The cookies won't appear. So the first time you land on the site, if it has same-site strict set, the cookies just won't go. And so you'll be logged out until subsequent requests. The middle ground and the default is lax. Lax only gives you the cookies on the safe requests, which are the get requests, which you shouldn't be doing anything on. If you do, stop. You need to do all your actions on post or put delete, because then same-site lax will prevent the cookies from going over. So you can't have the malicious JavaScript running in the background or random form submissions that are doing forged cross-site requests through there. Yes, there, those three. So lax is the one you really want. Unless you're doing something very specific, like some banks might go down the path of strict, but generally you just want lax, unless you need to have cross-site requests coming from different domains, in which case you want to look at none and have other protections like CSRF tokens or other mechanisms in place to protect those things. But generally you want lax because it gives you a good amount of security.
Question.
Yep.
The concept of same site.
Yep.
like just one web server, so it's the host name plus your domain name?
Yes, the same site is based
I've got
on...
two servers in
Yep.
the same domain sitting next to each other. They're not the same site.
Same site is based on the root domain. So it includes subdomains. So your a.site.com and b.site.com are considered the same domain because they're both part of site.com, which means that same site cookie lax and strict will work between different subdomains on the main domain, which is, helpful when you've got a complicated app that does different subdomain work. But it is a reason why you want CSRF tokens, because if someone can compromise one of your subdomains, they can use that to bypass same site cookie protection to get to other subdomains. But different domains, like site.com and hello.com, they're not the same site, and so that's where this comes into play. And if you're thinking of sites like github.io, which you can have subdomain.github.io, there's a list called the prefix, public suffix list, I think it is, which is used to define all like the public domains that have public subdomains to them, and so they're not considered the same site. So valoran.github.io and laravel.github.io are not considered the same site, and so I can't do same site attacks again, from mine onto the Laravel one, for example, because they're on the public list. So if your application does have any sort of public subdomains where users can have their subdomain and do their own thing, you need to look at the public suffix list and get it on there, because same site attacks could be done through that. All right, and the only other thing I was going to mention briefly are these wonderful things which make my head hurt. They make my head hurt. It's complicated. A lot of apps don't need to worry about these things, but if you do, then my recommendations are enable them slowly and only enable the minimum that you need, rather than try to configure everything to start with. So for those who aren't aware of what CORS is, it's basically allowing requests in the browser between different domains, and if you allow credentials to go through and what headers and methods can be used. So rather than just blanket open everything, open the minimum amount of things and slowly build up so that you don't accidentally open too much. Otherwise you can bite yourself in the, get caught in a dragon's mouth. Again, also movie, if you haven't seen it, you're missing out. Figure it out for yourselves, I'm not telling you. What was that? No. No, it is not. Also these ones, another lot of confusing acronyms. They're there for allowing complicated browser features that got locked down through the Spectre meltdown that had memory issues and things like that. So if you need these, you'll know about it and you'll have to configure them carefully. Most people don't need to care about these things, but they are a thing that do exist, that give you some advanced features. Yeah, I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Stephen?
I'll ask a question.
Yep.
Why should we not do what Forge does? What is the scariest things that could happen to our websites?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, the question is, why should we not do what Forge does? What's the scariest things that could happen?
Why should we add more security than the default Forge, for example?
Yeah, all right. So by default, let's just look at a default Forge one quickly. All right, so default Forge gives you this. It doesn't have strict transport security, which means that you can downgrade attack a site running on Forge that doesn't have that set. So for example, Laravel.com, you could downgrade attack and then do a redirect to, React or something, which would be fun for comedic value. Content security policy, again, if you don't have that, well, if you get cross-site scripting running on the Laravel website, you could, run some JavaScript on the Laravel website. It does all sorts of fun things. Move the documentation around or add typos or something. I don't know. Yeah, cross-site scripting is bad. Come on, we all know this. Referrer policy, that one's useful generally if you have like an internal application of some sort and you don't want to leak information. By default, it's not as important as the other two. Permissions policy, again, not as important. So these two aren't overly important in the grand scheme of things, but they're helpful. This one, referrer policy, is especially helpful if you have an internal site. But if you're running it on Forge, it's probably not an internal site. Still, it's good to have. But yeah, the main two that you really need to care about that Forge doesn't touch are these two. And I understand why. I mean, that one's tricky to enable unless you know the site doesn't need HTTP. Although Forge does default configure everything HTTP, so it really should do it. Maybe I'll annoy James about that. Because it's security policy, Forge can't do that by default, although it could, can't do it by default just the way the nature of it. So.
Could have a UI to like encourage you towards it.
It could be, but you'd want to do it through the application rather than through Forge.
Right.
But yeah, configuring strict transport security and these other things you could do through a URI in Forge, and I shall annoy James about it. It's still his job, right?
Yes.
Awesome. I shall annoy James. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
If you're using a content security source of that content could be
Yep.
any number of places that you have no idea until it happens. Right?
Yeah, there are different. There are different. Sorry. The question is, if you're using like Google Tag Manager and other complicated third-party includes, it can make content security policies complicated. And yes, there are different directives you can use that allow it to inherit things, or you can use nonces on includes rather than having to specifically mention domains. For example, in this one, I've got. No, that's chars the inline. There's a nonce here, so it says you see that it has the nonce and then nonce over here and then the hash. And so if this nonce hash is sitting as an attribute on included script tags, then they're allowed as per the policy without having to be specifically in the policy. So you could do that to allow the Google Tag Manager on your site, and there are other things like that to do. But the downside is, of course, if you're allowing something like that, then anything that it pulls in, there's a potential for it to be compromised. And SRI, you can't use sub-resource integrity on something like Google Tag Manager because it changes. So it isn't a risk you have to accept if you use any sort of third-party things like that. And like payment gateways, again, you can't use SRI on those. Some analytics things as well, they're not static scripts, so you can't use it on those. So anytime you're using a script you can't use SRI on, and you can't easily put a content security policy thing in, you need to be aware of the risks of them being compromised.
Or blocked, right?
Yeah.
Because they just won't be in your list.
Yeah, you could block. Yeah, or you could just block them if you want to block them. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you can warm up to the CSP by just logging and then
Yep.
to monitor that to see what would be blocked without
Yes.
blocking it, and then block it once you're satisfied.
Yeah. The thing was, you can warm up to your CSP policy by getting alerts rather than blocking. This is what the wizard is that I was quickly mentioned before. Is on my site here. I've got the read-only content security policy. So any violations go into this list rather than blocking it. And then I can go through this list and I can say, yes, I use Fathom, so I want that. I use SendStack, I want that. I have no idea why YouTube is on there. I honestly don't. But images, we can allow our own images in Fathom. Manifest files, sure. We can allow scripts. Why is Facebook on my site? No, I know why that is. Facebook is on there because the Facebook embedded browser adds its scripts to every page you visit when you're using it, which is a horrible, horrible blight. So don't allow that. CSP will block it. Yay. Why is that? That's a browser extension doing stupid things, so I'm going to ignore that. SendStack, yes. Cloudflare, yes. All right. Curious. I wonder why that one's there. I mean, that's my wife's site, but I don't know why it's on my thing. There's something, anyway, so this demonstrates perfectly that if there's something weird going on your site, the content security policy will tell you something weird is going on and you can investigate further and I can figure out why that's there. I've got Google, wait, do I have Google? Oh, anyway, the point is, I'm getting distracted.
Time to be changing your security policy.
But the point is, using the wizard here, I can select the things that should be there, I can go add selection, and then if I go over here, report URI has built me my policy. So now this is a new policy I can put up there. And then I can still keep this report only, upload this one, and it's going to keep reporting new violations, and I can do multiple iterations over weeks or even months of building my policy based on actual live data from the site while nothing gets broken. And some people never leave report only. Sometimes they just use report only and just monitor results and build the content security policy around that. So nothing ever breaks, but as long as you're monitoring it, you're aware of what's happening on your site, even though it's not being blocked. It still gives you that visibility. CSPs are awesome. I love them. So if you want to ask me more questions, happily I can talk all day about them. So find me after if you want to talk more about them.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay.
It's very cool to hear about those security things that are very scary and kind of sometimes boring to add. I kind of wish some of them were like easier because they were just really easy to go, I'll do that later. It's not my problem yet. I did have to confirm that lax is actually a legitimate word. I always thought it was an Australianism of relaxed, but it's actually its own word, so that's fun. So I think we'll take like maybe 5 minutes or even a little bit less for bathroom, if there's any pizza left over, or grabbing a drink, and then we'll get into Greg's talk. So be real quick, please. I don't see. Yeah, cool. All right. So next up we have Greg. Where's your talk title? This thing?
Yeah.
Excellent. We have Greg Skerman. He is accordingly a guest on the thing, but he also actually runs the meetup. So it's awesome to have Greg giving a talk. Always good to hear his wisdom. And you are going to be talking Going Small, Practical Guide to Working in Small Steps. I'm looking forward to this. Everyone, welcome Greg.
Good day, everyone. I'm Greg. Funny that. I'm the Director of Technology at iSeek Plant, so we're Australia's largest online construction marketplace. I'm just based around the corner here. And I'm also a team performance coach, so if anyone is interested in figuring out how to do some of this stuff and wants some of my time one-on-one, come and see me. Co-host of the Ripples FM podcast. We have 600 all-time downloads. It'd be great to see that go up a little bit. We talk to, I speak with Michael Dorindo. We talk to people who've put themselves out there in public and seen good things happen to them. You can find me on their socials and so on there. So last November, I spoke at Laracon in Sydney about 7 habits of a high-performing team. And since then, I've had a number of people and companies reach out to me and ask about how to go about implementing some of these habits. And specifically, the habit that always comes up is how do you actually work in small steps, which can be quite tricky. So tonight, I'm going to go through a few patterns and anti-patterns associated with working small. And hopefully you can take something away from it, and tighten up your feedback loops, and start delivering value to customers regularly. So a bit of a small steps recap for those who haven't seen the talk. That's a link to G. Hill's blog series on many more much smaller steps. Really, really insightful. A lot of my current thinking about breaking work down comes from that series of blog posts. But basically, what a step is in this context is a period of unreadiness between 2 ready states. So most of us probably have an application running in production. Unfortunately, this doesn't really work for stuff that doesn't exist yet. There's a whole other sort of walking skeleton thing you have to get to. But let's assume you have some software running in production. We would consider that to be ready. And then you have some target condition that you want to take your software to. And when you reach that target condition, your application will again be ready. The step is the period of unreadiness that exists between those 2 states. And what we want to try and do is minimize the amount of time that we spend in that unready state. And working that way brings a whole bunch of benefits to us. We get feedback faster about the change that we're trying to make. So the unfortunate truth about building software, there's been a whole bunch of research into this across Microsoft and Amazon and all the huge Valley companies. It's not Fortitude Valley, but Silicon Valley companies. Is that 2 out of 3 well-thought, well-researched, good ideas end up producing 0 or negative value to the businesses that they're built in. So working in small steps allows us to get feedback about whether or not our great idea is on the right path, so that we can abandon them if they're not, because most of the time we are going to be wrong. Like, it's horrible to think that if we could just figure out what the 1/3 was, we could spend 9 months of the year sitting on a beach in Tahiti drinking a cocktail out of a pineapple. So we can lean into the ideas that work by discovering whether we're on the right path. We can abandon things that aren't working, or we can pivot and change directions. And we want to try and do that as frequently as we can. So we can pivot faster when we learn. We also don't need to understand the entire solution up front. And this is really, really key, particularly for how we work at iSeek Plant. We often don't actually know what the thing we will ultimately end up being looks like. We have an idea, we have a North Star, we have something that we're moving towards, but we generally only need to know enough information to get started on 1 or 2 possible ways that we could implement that. It also makes making changes safer because the changes are smaller. It de-risks rollbacks because the size of a release is going to be effectively microscopic. And it has huge positive psychological benefits for the people who are working on the software. So if you're working in small steps, you get huge endorphin rush when your stuff hits production and customers start using your thing. Great, feel really, really good. If you can do that 10 times a day, you can really motivate people to continue to push to get the idea out because they're seeing their hard work produce value quickly. It's way easier and cheaper to step back if you're on the wrong path because you haven't spent 6 months building a thing only to find out that no customers want to pay for it, which is really horrible when that happens. There's a lot less cognitive load, there's fewer spinning plates, you don't have a whole team trying to figure out all of the things that go together into some big comprehensive solution. You get more opportunities to be interrupted. So if something comes up and you need to change directions, you can stop what you're doing, not throw away all the value that you've already extracted from the problem you're trying to solve, and move on to something else that's more valuable for the business. And yeah, obviously safe reversals, rollbacks are a lot easier. So I'm going to quickly go through the obvious way of doing this, and this was the first way we tried to do this. And we'll go through why the obvious way has some problems. So the obvious way is to figure out the thing that you're going to build, figure out the entire thing that you're going to build, task the whole thing out in Jira. So just take your big sort of, we need a customer to be able to log on to internet banking and transfer money between clients and all that kind of stuff. That's the feature. Let's figure out every single micro step that's going to go into that and task the whole thing out. And then we split the work up across the team. So every individual gets one tiny piece of the puzzle to try and put together. And then as those pieces of work come in, try and integrate them back together. And once everything is done, we release it. So that actually achieves working in small steps. We can break a piece of work down almost infinitely to any size that we want, because we deliver code one line at a time. So that's the sort of smallest you can get to, is one line of code equals one commit. This is often known as scatter gather. So you scatter the problem out across a team and you try and pull it all back together in the end. And it's a massive anti-pattern. The problem is you don't get feedback until you've got all the pieces back together. So you're actually no better off from a feedback standpoint than you were if you just worked in one giant blob. Pivoting is way harder because you don't know where all the pieces are at any given point in time. You might have pieces that are unrelated, and the pieces in the middle that allow you to derive value from things that are being worked on haven't been done yet. So there's more things in flight, and it's harder for you to get some value out the door if you need to change. And probably most critically, it relies on everyone being clear about the objective and how it's being implemented upfront and in total. So I don't know about anyone else, but a complicated problem I have trouble keeping in my head. Imagine trying to communicate the solution to that complicated problem to 10 people and have everybody all understand it exactly the way that I do at the same time. It's really, really tricky to do. So that's the way to probably not go about doing it. It is the obvious way of doing it. It's kind of the intuitive way of doing it. But the real way of doing it, or the way that we found that works to doing it, is a lot more fun and a lot more interesting. So the first thing you want to do is define a problem, not a solution. I think the worst thing you can do when you're at the start of trying to build something is jump straight to solutions. And as engineers, this is what we do. We see some shiny solution that we could implement. Often we try and fit a problem to that solution because we want to play with cool stuff. I'm getting laughs from the side from people who obviously clearly do this on a daily basis. Also, stakeholders in the business will do this as well. They will have a small inkling of a problem, and then they will, in their heads, leap to a solution and then bring a solution to the engineering team and say, if you just implemented this exactly the way that I've shown it to you, we'll get great results. It can be really, really hard to resist the urge to do that. A better way I've found is to frame things in terms of, we've identified a problem, and the opportunity to the business is X if we're able to solve that problem. So we open up a conversation early on about all of the possible ways that you can solve a particular problem that you've got. You then rely on the engineering team, which I'm not going to go as far as to say that engineers in a business are the best problem solvers in a business, because that's not necessarily the case, but it is probably the highest concentration of problem solvers that a business has. Like, it's what we do for a living, right? We solve problems. And there's 5, 10, 15 of us all in a room. It's a pretty strong group of problem solvers. Really, the solution to the problem shouldn't matter. The outcome, solving the problem ultimately matters. It doesn't really matter how you go about doing it. You might want to fence it a little bit. If you're running a business selling Beanie Babies, pivoting to a gambling den might probably, to solve a business problem, probably isn't great. So fencing it a little bit in terms of what in the solution space is allowable for your business, so that it aligns with what your business is trying to do and aligns to your business values, is probably a good idea. The next step is to come up with just enough detail to start solving the problem. So actually the act of doing the implementation is where most of this discovery tends to happen. So just get enough information to get started and then work on it together. That first piece of detail should be sort of couched in terms of what is the smallest step we can take that will teach us more about whether or not we're solving the problem. So you're not even necessarily trying to get to the North Star in one step. You might actually take a bit of a sideways journey to add some analytics to your platform so that you can gather more information to shore up a hunch that somebody has. You might be looking at making some changes to your technology to enable you to move faster in a particular set of solutions that you could work on. But really what you're trying to do in those early stages is work on something that lets you learn more about the problem so that you can solve it over time. And then we just keep going through that loop. So once you've finished doing that first step, sit up, have a look around. Did the change that we make teach us more about the problem? Are we on the right track? If we're not on the right track, we may have spent, in our case at IC Plant, we probably spent 3 hours figuring out that we might not be on the right track. So the total amount, at that early stage, the worst case is we're going to throw 3 hours of work out. We're not going to throw 3 weeks of work out, just 3 small hours of work out. More than likely, you will be on track, but maybe not quite as aligned to it as you want. And it allows you to ask the question again, what's the next thing that we can do to solve, to learn more about the problem that we're trying to solve? And make these micro adjustments early so that we keep moving towards what our target condition is. The other thing is ask yourself whether the target condition has changed, and that happens more often than you would expect. So if you're working sort of in a traditional 2-week sprint kind of cycle, the number of times that I've seen the actual destination that we want to hit change in 2 weeks because of competitive forces in the industry that you're working in, or some new technology comes along that completely flips the thing that you're trying to build on its head. That happens pretty frequently. So every time you finish one of these steps, not only are you asking, what do I want to do to learn more about the thing I'm trying to solve, you also ask yourself, are we still solving a problem that's worth solving? Through those conversations, you decide whether it's worth doing, worth continuing to do, or you decide to go, we've gone far enough, and we'll abandon it, or we'll move on to something else. So this is like an outcomes-focused approach to solution design. At every step, some unit of value is being delivered. That may not be customer value. It might be value to the business in terms of getting more intelligence about what's going on, or it might be value to your platform because you've had to make some refactorings that make it easier just to get around more generally. But at every step, you're unlocking some more learning, or you're getting a tangible piece of value within a subset of a solution that you can start putting in the hands of customers. The other thing is to work together. So this is to avoid the scattering effect that I was talking about with the scatter-gather approach. Everyone, or groups of subsets of people within a team, all work on the same thing at the same time. So we're really only working on one thing at a time. You may end up parallelizing work once you start really understanding what's going on. So as you can imagine, as you're moving on, say, a 6-month feature build, the further down that line you get, if you've stayed in the feature for that long, you may start to know enough where you can start dividing the work up and paralleling it. But early on, it's very much people talking a lot, people pairing a lot, and whole groups of people working on problems, so that everyone has the information about the immediate problem that's being solved in their heads, and none of the extraneous detail that sits around the outside. You then have a regular cadence of check-ins, and that can be multiple times per day. So that can be over Slack, that can be over video chat, that can be in person if you're in an office. If you are in an office, co-locate your team, put them in the same pod so that you can just spin your chair around and say, hey, I've done this thing. What do we reckon? Should we keep going in that direction? Yeah. This is another really, really cool strategy. It's some deep Kent Beck wisdom. It comes from, he's working on a book at the moment called Thinkies, which are, can't quite remember how he refers to them. They're effectively small language tricks that allow you to generate ideas. And half in half is one of them. So let's say you've got a big change that you want to make. You know roughly that that change is going to take 6 months to implement the whole thing. You can ask yourself the question, if you only had half the time, which half of it would you want? And because it's Kent Beck, and if anyone knows anything about Kent Beck, the whole thing's fractal. So once you've got your little 3-month chunk, you then ask the same question. You want to deliver this in 3 months, you've only got 6 weeks. Which half of it do you want? And you can keep dividing that until you get down to the cycle time that you're interested in. And this becomes a sorting algorithm for figuring out the highest priority thing that you should be working on. You can actually take this all the way down to like minutes if you were that insane. You then work on the highest priority thing through doing this process, and once you've finished working on that, you actually go through and do the whole exercise again. Because through that learning, you may discover that the next step actually exists in the sort of 3 months that you threw out at the very beginning. This can be pretty quick to do though. So you just talk about what's left and say, okay, well, we've only got 5 weeks left. How much can we do in 2.5 weeks? How much can we do in 5 weeks? And so on and so forth. Working safely is also really important. And to work in small steps, you have to make some architectural considerations. If you're not already working in small steps, chances are there's some things about the way that your software is built that will make it difficult to do this. Product marketing and sales will almost certainly, and I think rightfully so, demand some level of control over when the majority of customers see a big change. Unless you're lucky enough to work in an organization that's like agile from wall to wall across every department, which is pretty rare. We need the feedback as the work goes out. We need to know that the 2-hour change or the 3-hour change that we've made has made a positive impact so we can make the next decision. So there's heaps of ways of handling this. Feature flagging is probably the easiest way to get started. Go and install Laravel Pennant. It's free, it's awesome. And it will take you a really, really long way on feature flagging. You can also look at PostHog, which is what we're currently using. It's got a great free tier, like a stupidly generous free tier that a lot of businesses will probably never need to get out of. Feature flagging is effective, and I've done a talk previously on feature flagging. Feature flagging is effectively, if this feature is on, run this code. Otherwise, don't run the code. It is easy to get started with. It can be a bit of a trap because if you're not careful, you end up building all of this stuff behind a feature flag and not getting the feedback on it, which then kind of puts you back into the bucket of why are we bothering with the small steps when we're not learning about anything for 6 months. What you can do with feature flagging though is release all of your changes to select groups of people. So early on, that might just be the engineering team. So the engineering team has all the feature flags turned on. We don't mind if everything is in pieces all over the floor and broken. As the solution starts to mature, you might open that up to product stakeholders and key people within the business. A bit later on, you may open that up to some customers who are really friendly with you, who don't mind playing with the latest and greatest stuff. You can do really crazy things where you have interfaces within your code that allow your customers to opt into new features. And if you've ever used the Atlassian suite of products, this happens all the time. Hey, we're trying this new thing out. I think AWS do it as well. We're trying a new dashboard. Do you want to see what the new dashboard looks like? You're opting into a feature flag when you do that. And you can implement that kind of thing relatively easily, if that makes sense. Another way of doing it is dark launching, which is where you send everything into production. And in a Laravel sense, that would mean you have a route to a controller that has your new feature sitting on it, or an alternative controller for an existing feature that you can get to, but you don't link to it. You lock it away from robots.txt so that browsers can't find it, search engines can't find it. You don't link to it internally, you just know what the URL is. You can even go so far as making the URL completely unguessable. And then when you're ready to cut over, you make your change in your routes file to point the new controller to the route of the old controller. And the gold standard, and this can be a little bit tricky, is branch by abstraction. So that's when you take an existing piece of functionality and you wrap an interface around the outside of it. And then you write the new functionality or the functionality that is replacing or augmenting that existing piece of functionality in a new service that adheres to the same interface, and you switch them out inside the IAC container. Be really careful here because you can end up over abstracting. A lot of your code won't actually need to change that frequently, so wrapping everything up in interfaces so you can swap out 1,000 different versions of a service is probably not a great idea. But if you do need to do something like that, it's a really great way of doing things. Measurement is also really, really important for this. If you're making very, very small changes, and I don't necessarily advocate for working at the cycle length that we have at IC Plant. We're kind of a bit crazy. We deploy every 2 hours, which is a little nuts. But because we're deploying every 2 hours, the amount of change that we can release in 2 hours is very, very small. So going up and asking a customer whether or not the tiny change that I made had any kind of impact can be a bit tricky. So again, using tools like PostHog, or you can get away with things like Google Analytics and Fathom for some of this, to understand at sort of a micro level whether or not the change you're making is having the impact that you expected. So you might be looking at conversion analytics if you've got like an e-com solution, for instance. You also want to look at observability. So as you're rolling new changes out and they're in production, albeit hidden behind flags, use your observability tools within your cloud hosting solution to make sure that the change you're making is stable and that you're not putting unnecessary impact on infrastructure. And also call your customers. Or go and sit next to your customers if you've got internal customers. And by this I mean I think engineers should be speaking directly to customers. You don't necessarily want somebody sitting next to a customer who is then sort of translating what the customer is saying to you. You can often learn a hell of a lot more by just sitting next to a customer and watching what they're doing than having someone try and explain that to you. The reason you want to do that is you might be thinking that the change you're making is making their lives really, really easy. I'm removing 15 form fills for them, and that's going to be great for them, but you may find that some of the customers actually need those for whatever reason. And if you don't ask them, it's probably be too late to roll it back if you release it and you end up annoying them. So yeah, cool. So, sort of summing up, work small by identifying the problems and taking iterative steps towards solving those problems. Don't necessarily try and solve the entire problem up front. Now, if the problem is really well contained and it's the kind of problem you've solved before, or it's a relatively small thing, you can solve the entire problem in a meeting. I'm not sitting here suggesting that we shouldn't try and do that, but for larger bodies of work, don't try and solve it in your sprint planning meeting. Just try and get enough information to get started so that you can start moving, and then use the development process itself as the means of discovery. Be ready to change tact early and abandon a solution quickly if you find it's not going to work. Try not to become too attached to your favorite solutions to problems. I know that's hard. We all have our code babies and we feel like, you know, we need to see them graduate into real big boy features. But if you're not genuinely moving the needle, you're potentially building something that falls into one of those two-thirds of features producing 0 or negative value. Make sure you're working safely so that you can deploy frequently. If anyone wants to have a chat to me about how you can go about deploying directly into production every time you make a change and doing that in a way that is completely safe, even at 2 minutes to 5 on a Friday before you go on 4 weeks leave, trust me, it's possible. If you can't do that, you still have work to do. Have a measurement framework in place to help you understand whether you're hitting the right marks and whether you're getting enough information to understand whether you're on the right track. And let your solution emerge from small steps and feedback, and probably most importantly, conversations with people who are actually using the software that you're building. Questions?
How do you find the support stream, cooperating with the sort of more strategic stream that you actually want to be doing? How do you reconcile the two?
So by support you mean, so the question is how do we manage feature requests?
Bug requests,
Yeah.
just like QA from things that have already been used, for
Yeah.
example.
So the question is, how do we manage working with a stream of support requests that are coming in the form of feature requests or bug reports while we're trying to work on strategic? That's fair, just for the.
Yeah.
So there are other habits that I spoke about in November. One of them we have a 0 known bugs in production policy. So the second that there is a bug, that becomes the highest priority work that we can be working on. And in our case, it's down to a typo. Someone notices a typo, we will drop working on strategic work to get the typo fixed and deployed. Now we can do that because every single change that we make hits production within about 12 minutes of the change being merged into main and running through CI, which not everyone can obviously get to. In terms of feature requests, we are very lucky to have a product team who field a lot of those, and then they work on sort of what the larger, understanding whether or not those feature requests are servicing a larger product strategy goal. But again, we really, like, feature requests are a really interesting thing because a feature request is really a solution to a problem. So the most important thing is, like, what problem are you actually trying to solve by requesting that change? Yes, you want an extra field on that form. What if I can make the entire form go away from you by doing something completely different? So you're trying to treat those feature requests as like the opening to a conversation to try and find out more about what's actually going on.
So I've kind of fitted to this methodology since I saw your clarifying. But this idea of dropping things and suddenly working on like bugs, typos,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of stuff, it feels a bit micromanaging. And like I have people, my DMs constantly, oh, I've spotted this typo, oh, I found this. It's starting to frustrate me like 6 months into this. Is there an easy way to manage that?
Yeah. So the question is that that adopting a 0 known bugs in production approach can lead to a bit of micromanage you, drop everything, and work on this bug. I think, and I spoke a little bit about this in November, deciding what is actually a bug and whether you're going to fix it is a conversation you need to have with the business. I know plenty of businesses who won't fix obscure CSS problems or won't fix typos because they don't think it's worth their time. We're lucky in that we have such a rapid feedback cycle, and the teams in the room, they probably sometimes appreciate coming off working on these small feature changes and getting a bit of a break to work on a reasonably small bug, as long as it isn't our friend reg. So a reg is a bug that wipes people out. There's like some internal mythology around this, but a reg is a bug that will come along and wipe you out for 3 weeks. So work with the business to actually determine what bugs you will actually solve. And it is okay if somebody logs a bug and the business has decided that it doesn't meet the bar for you dropping everything and working on it. And then you just close it and say, sorry, I won't fix it. Now, if it is truly a bug, it will keep coming back. And it may at some point rise to the level that you might go and work on it. You may even classify it as something else. You may decide to have a different ticket called typos, for argument's sake, and you just put them all in a box and then once every month go through and just blitz them all out. It shouldn't necessarily be something that does cause that level of frustration. The other thing too is to make sure that you have a really good reporting process. We won't let people get in our DMs and report a bug. Our immediate response will be, have you logged a bug? And if it's not logged in our bug tracking system, we don't look at it. We're not interested in shoulder taps. We're not interested in people interrupting us. The only way to get the work done is to put it into a bug backlog. And then we will decide when we come off working on one of these small cycles to go and have a look at what's in the bug backlog. So we're kind of controlling when we're being interrupted by doing that. So there's a couple of strategies. Happy to go and talk you through. Yeah, and look, every bug tracking tool out there has either APIs that you can hook into that will allow you to write stuff into a backlog, or outright has a form that you can just embed in a page that they can click on and do their thing.
If you make them use Jira, they won't submit any bugs at all.
Hey, we make them use Jira.
What was that second library you were talking about when it comes to feature flagging? The Laravel and the other one.
So the question is, what was the second library? It's a tool called PostHog, P-O-S-T-H-O-G. It's commercial software that's hosted. They do have a community edition and an open source edition that if you want to run your own Kubernetes stack, and it got about 40 containers in order to make it, well, I think it's deliberately made to be as difficult as possible, so you go with their hosted solution. But if you wanted to, you could definitely stand up your own instance of that and then have access to everything. It does feature flagging, experimentation, A/B testing, product analytics, funnel analytics, customer data management. Like it rolls up. They call it a product operating system. It kind of rolls up a lot of the features that exist in various product analytics tools and bundles it all up into one sort of package.
What happened to launch Darkly?
Too expensive. when like PostHog is free, so PostHog also tends to work more on the front end. So if you've ever worked with things like Fathom Analytics or Google Analytics, where you're kind of just raising events in your JavaScript to submit analytics data, it's basically that kind of thing. Whereas LaunchDarkly can do that, but we ended up having to build a lot of sort of PHP code to manage flags on the back end. So we kind of grew out of that a little bit. But I mean, LaunchDarkly is a fine tool as well if you've got the money to spend on it and the time to do a good integration. It's a fine tool for this kind of stuff too. Less so on the analytics side, more on the feature flagging side in that case.
How do product managers go sort of communicating timelines when we don't know how many things?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. So the question is, how do product managers go about communicating timelines? We don't estimate. We're a no estimates business. But we do work for a business that has forecasts to hit. So you can do a thing called a cumulative flow diagram, where in our case, we can just count stories, but if you're doing story point estimation, you have your story points. Start of a sprint, you have the number of story points left in the backlog that you want to work on. At the end of the sprint, you have whatever's left plus whatever was added. and you work the whole way through that. You can then draw two trend lines, one between the sort of top of the graph, which is the things that were left plus the things that have been added, and then one through the original graph, which is the things that are left, and the intersection of those lines will be roughly when the release date will be of that particular body of work. And if that isn't hitting a milestone, like if you've got a trade show or you've got some legislative thing that you need to comply with, you can have a conversation very early about, we're not going to hit that date unless we either increase the size of the team or descope the amount of work that we're trying to do. So it's more based on forecasting as opposed to guesswork, which is all estimation really is. I can dig out some, there's a great talk by Alan Holob that goes into this. I can dig it out for you and get you a copy.
Can you
Sweet.
expand a little bit, just if you do no estimation
Mhm.
on work, because I have experience with that where someone on the board asked me how long it would take to create an app, and I said, I can't really tell you. Like, you know, down to the day or the week, and I was basically told to my face I was incompetent for not knowing how to do my job. And I'm just curious as to,
Yeah.
you've obviously got a much better board than I had, but or more enlightened perhaps. But what's the alternative to that? So there must be a measure that you've done some good work that would value somehow that the board can go, oh yeah, they're doing great.
Yeah.
They are doing good. We need to let them.
So
What is that measure?
So part of this is working. So the question is, how do you deal with, we won't say boards, but stakeholders who insist on estimation and then more or less tell you that you're incompetent if,
What do you do instead
what do you do instead of that?
of an estimation?
So lots of things, and there's no single clear-cut answer to this, but if you are working in small steps and you are continuously pushing value into production, that's the real key, right? It's not just working in small steps, but continuously having a stream of value. The record can kind of stand for itself. Now, the business can decide can help you decide what the priorities are, what you should be working on, but they kind of know that in our case, 10 times per day, changes are hitting production. They can kind of, to a degree, control the levers as to which 10 changes are actually hitting production. But having a track record of being able to do that is really, really good. Constraining the cycle time is another one too. So like, we just divide the work up until it kind of fits into what our desired cycle time looks like. Now, that's an average cycle time. There are definitely cases where a cycle will blow out to days because we are humans and we misunderstand something, or we think something's going to be easy and it turns out to be reg. That happens. But if you look at the average and we sort of have this very consistent rhythm of work that's going out, we can then sort of say, look, we look at this thing, we're starting to divide it up, we can draw our trend lines in terms of the rate at which we're dividing work, so the rate at which the backlog is growing, because every time you cut a story in half, you get 2 stories, so the backlog grows, and draw projections off it that way. So if we're not so much estimating, which I've been doing this for more than 20 years and I've never hit an estimate accurately. Even ones that I've sandbagged, I've never seen.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, because it is pure guesswork, right?
I actually helped someone doing a PhD at Queensland Uni one time who was devising a system where you would count all these various variables and people and everything, and it would come up with a magic number of how many lines of code and how long it was going to take a certain set of people to write. And I was part of that and helping her with that, and halfway through the whole thing, it was abandoned because what they learned in trying to devise this system, and you can't.
Yeah, I think there's I'm going to butcher the quote, but I think there's an Adam Wathan quote where he said, "We will not know we will never know less about the thing that we're trying to build than we do today." And the cool thing about, like, we build a lot of metaphor into how we go about building software. We use the word build. Building software is actually zero cost, because building software is the act of copying it to a server so that it can run, in our case, for web development. So building's free. Design is really, really expensive. Yet when you sort of say build, everyone kind of leaps to built environment and manufacturing, where the actual cost is sort of outsized in implementation, is in actually constructing the thing. Whereas in our case, it's in the design side of things. And if we knew how long something was the only way to know how long something is going to take, which is non-trivial and novel, is that we've done it before, in which case the cost should be 0, because we can just copy the bytes and put them where they need to go.
That was kind of the conclusion I came to,
Yeah.
is that in what we do as software developers, we're building everything for the first time. And when we're finished building this thing, the next thing we build,
We've
we're
never built
building
before.
it for the first time.
Yeah, and look, we might learn some things. There might be some shapes and patterns and things that exist, but if it is the same.
We get the little bits that them in where we can.
100%. There's some really great speakers who speak on this a lot. So Jez Humble talks about this a great deal. He started the Dora group, which ended up getting bought out by Google. I think he now runs the SRE team at Google, has done heaps and heaps of talks on estimation and working in this kind of way, and particularly around changing the economics of working in small batches, which is what we try, this is what continuous deployment does, is it allows working in small batches to be economic, so you don't batch things up and do 6-monthly deploys. And there's can't remember the name of, Dave Farley has a great book called Modern Software Engineering, which also goes into a lot of this stuff around the folly of estimation. Now, having those conversations with people is difficult because, like a lot of things in software engineering, the truth is counterintuitive. So your intuition says 6 people should be able to look at a problem of this shape and figure out precisely what day the whole thing will be built.
Explaining it to a non-IT person.
Is difficult. So yeah, there's no clear-cut answer to this, but I think having being able to consistently deliver value is a really great fence around those kinds of conversations, because it's like we can deliver value at roughly this rate. Where do you want to aim the team?
Thanks for that.
That's right.
What you said you do is, I was trying to sell them. Let us have a go at it and then evaluate us on merit after we've done some stuff, and wouldn't wash. It's like, if you can't tell me exactly how much it's going to cost, we're not going to give you the money to do it.
Yeah, and it is also quite different when you're working in a business that's producing software versus working for a business that is consulting with other businesses, because it's very, very difficult to sell this way of working to a customer because they want a fixed price. Yeah. Cool. All right. If there's no other questions, I will hand over to Jess to close us out. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Greg. One thing Greg kind of touched on was his Ripple's podcast, which is about putting little things out there and watching how they ripple and can grow into bigger things and become bigger opportunities. And that's kind of relevant because we are always looking for new speakers, and speaking at a local meetup is a great way to start some of those little ripples. So if anyone is thinking maybe they might want to try giving speaking a go, this is a great place to get started. We're all very caring and friendly people, and we want to see you succeed. So yeah, get your talk ideas in and get those ripples out there. I don't want to take up too much time because we're eating into our networking time, but I do want to talk about Laracon AU, which is in November 7 and 8 in Brisbane this year instead of Sydney. So that is freaking awesome.
Oh, come on, there's a better word than
So it's at the QUT Gardens Theatre. I'm not going to say the name of the other place because I don't want people to get confused. It's definitely QUT Gardens Theatre.
Do you want me to play it? Do you want me to play the video?
Oh, if we have a video about it, yes. I do want to say the blind bird tickets sold out within a week. There are limited early bird tickets still available for $599. So I would recommend getting in on those if you have not already. The first 3 speakers have already been announced, and there are a lot more exciting things to come. So we have a little video that Michael Dorinda has prepared, I believe. Here we go. Is he going to say everything I just said?
pretty much.
Well, everyone, in a new city, in a bigger venue, Laracon AU is back in 2024, and we are bringing you more than ever before, with a fantastic lineup of speakers to be announced, more social and networking opportunities for everyone. Come stay, play, learn, and save with the Laravel community in Brisbane, Queensland. This year, Laracon AU is heading to the Gardens Theatre at the Queensland University of Technology's Gardens Point campus, situated directly next to the Brisbane City Botanic Gardens, right in the heart of the Brisbane CBD. The Gardens Theatre foyer and atrium are naturally lit, and the room is huge. There is plenty of room to mingle, to network, and move around as much as you desire. Tea and coffee will be provided on arrival. We're catering lunch, afternoon tea on both days of the conference, so you will have plenty of opportunities to see everyone.
It's cool to be with a heap of like-minded individuals. If you don't like feeling good, don't come. But if you want to feel good, come to Laracon.
After Dark is back, and it is going to be bigger and better than ever. It has bowling, it has escape rooms, it has pool tables, it has laser tag. Yes, we checked for sure this time, and we will also have mini golf. Food, drinks, all on us. We can't wait to have you all there. And last year we found that people that spoke on the second day didn't have the same level of interaction with attendees that those who spoke on the first day, and so for the first time ever we are introducing a post-conference social event called High Tide. We've worked really hard with a number of operators this year, and I'm excited to announce that we have special offers in place with Brisbane Sky Tower, Capri by Fraser, and 6 different apartment properties operated by Clicks Apartments. The watering holes will be a fantastic opportunity for attendees to meet and socialise before and after the conference with food and drink specials at designated venues that we've already organised for you.
I think it's a great introduction to our wonderful and beautiful community, and I would highly recommend you come and see what we're all about.
You'd be hard pressed to find something anywhere there's good bang for buck.
Now for the bit that you've been waiting for, tickets will be on sale from the 14th of May. Blind and early bird pricing will be available in limited quantities, so be sure to sign up to the mailing list at laracon.au to be notified first as soon as those tickets go on sale. We can't wait to see you all in Brisbane, where we're going to bring you more than ever before.
Thank you, Michael. That is everything. So I think we want to be out of here at like 7:30, which is only 10 minutes. So there's not a whole lot of networking time. A little bit longer? Oh my goodness.
Can we stay longer? I'm going to break everything.
Is the stream finished now?
Stream finished?
Yeah.